God, it was a
I
beautiful.
should have many, many more, inshallah.
Yeah.
Amen.
Right. Well, thank you all again. Great to see everybody. We're going to dedicate tonight's class in memory of Moshe ben Salcha, Moshe Shama, Jaime and Win Jaime Shama and Win Shrem's dad. That our learning should be the Aliyat Nishmato, that it should be rich as the Shema, and the understanding and love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that comes from it should also go to his merit. Amen.
Amen.
We want to touch on an area tonight that I think is important, exciting, interesting, maybe a little challenging, God willing, in terms of our perspective about the Galut, about Exodus, about Egypt in particular, and about the Galut, about Exodus in general. So that would mean that we're going to take the beginning of the story of Shemot, we're going to look at it carefully, and we're going to blow it up as it's meant to be blown up to represent what our Galuyot, what our Exodus will forever be, what our travels outside of the land of Israel will forever be. And I think some of the perspectives here are new and fresh. If not new, they'll be important reminders to many of us and help us frame a number of important things in terms of our lives and in terms of how we look at the process, the experience of the Jewish people. Again, with God's help, when whoever's has noise in the background, please mute. Everybody else, questions, thoughts, as we've done in the past, as much sharing and interaction as possible. So let's start with, as we typically do, with our paradigms, the axioms, the core principles from which we build. So the first one is that the book of Shemot, Sefer Shemot, and particularly the story of how things go in the land of Egypt, are the paradigm for all of the Exodus stories that will ever be. So again, the story of Egypt, how it's portrayed to us, how we live it, all we take from it. Let's reframe that in our minds, not as the story of something that happened back then, that was, of course, important, but it's the story of what will happen throughout the Galut, throughout the times when we're outside of the land of Israel. This is the framework. This is the template. And what we saw there and what our great-great-grandparents experienced is a paradigm for where things will always be when we're outside of the land of Israel. Okay? Step one. Step two. In the first verse of the book of Shemot, like the first verse of the book of Bereshit, has a world of information that it presents to us. When we started a handful of weeks back with Bereshit, we took the pasuk Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In this period of Bereshit, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the heavens and the earth, and we went at it over and over again. And by going at it over and over again, we were able to learn tons of new things that carried us throughout the book of Bereshit, and that will carry us really throughout our experience as Jews. Same thing here. Ve'ele shemot b'nei Yisrael habaim mitzrayma et Yaakov ish ubeto ba'u. And there's a connecting vav, so the ve'ele connects us back to the last book, even though it doesn't seem to have a lot to do with Bereshit. And these are the names of the Jewish people, habaim. I'm not going to translate it. Hold the word ba'im for a minute. Mitzrayma, to Egypt. Et Yaakov, the Yaakov, a little curious. Ish ubeto ba'u. All the important people and all whom belonged to them came down. As we did with the other pasuk, the other verse in Bereshit, there are too many words here. Just tell me Yaakov's family came down. El Hashemot, these are the people. The Yaakov, all the important people, and everybody who belonged to them. And it connects to Sefer Bereshit. You're telling me something that I need to delve into, I need to work at, I need to think about. So we need to start by saying that here again, this first pasuk is the launch pad for us. Good. We're going to get into that in a minute. Now, one other thing we need to keep in mind is that Hakadosh Baruch Hu manifests himself, shows himself differently in the book of Shemot
Yeah.
as in the book of Bereshit.
No.
In the
They
book,
just come in,
yeah,
and Sammy and my mother are waiting outside.
okay. Let's try and mute that. Okay, all right, great. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, great. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, God shows Himself in the book of Bereshit through the name, so to speak, of Shaddai, meaning the power, the force that said to the world, stop, that said to creation, stop. In other words, the God that we see in the book of Bereshit is a God who said, I can create everything to its final point of perfection. I'm going to take creation to point X, and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to constrict myself, so to speak, and not allow myself, so to speak, to complete it. I'm going to limit what is. And not only is the limitation going to be in what is created in this beginning of the world, but it's also going to be in how Hakadosh Baruch Hu shows himself. So the God that shows himself in the book of Bereshit with the name Shaddai is a God who wants to show himself to a limited amount of people, Abraham Avinu and his family, children, great-grandchildren, and in a limited way. The God, so to speak, obviously the same God, but the God that comes in Sefer Shemot is Amonai and Elokim. This is the God who wants to go public, who wants to show all of the Jewish people as they grow and all of mankind who and what he is to the extent that we all can understand. So, point A, the book of Shemot is the book that will describe Jewish process, Jewish destiny, the Jewish journey forever. B, the first pasuk in the book is very curious, very unusual, and redundant in its language, and seems to overemphasize who came down, where it could have simply said Yaakov and his children came to Egypt. Yaakov came, and the important people came, and everybody came. And it uses the word ba'im, and it uses that word twice. And finally, in terms of an introduction, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to understand him differently now. He wants us to be able to relate to him differently. So he shows himself to us differently. And this is something that we're going to discuss as we go, as we move forward and go through the book. Okay. The Midrash says something very interesting about the structure of the first pasuk. It says that the extra language in the pasuk and the overemphasis in the pasuk comes to highlight the idea that everybody wanted to go. Everybody wanted to be there. What are you talking about? Why would anybody want to go? HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes the promise that the land of Israel is our land forever, that the land of Israel is a place where we will build and we will grow, and ultimately we will build our eternal connection. Why would anybody want to go to Egypt? No, the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah says everybody wanted to go down, and in fact, The Et Yaakov is Im Yaakov. Yaakov himself wanted very much to go down, but it goes further. The Midrash says that had Yaakov and his children not all gone down, had not all 12 tribes gone down to grow in Egypt, then Hakadosh Baruch Hu would have enabled Yosef HaSadiq to have many more children so that he could have had 12 tribes to build an experience of 12 tribes of Jews in the land of Egypt. Crazy. Why? The land of Egypt was what? It was slavery. It was difficult. It was much worse than difficult. No, the Midrash says everybody should be there. Everybody wanted to be there. Had they all not gotten there for whatever reason, Yosef, who was already there, would have been built from, and that's why the Torah adds the words Yosef Hayab Mitzrayim. Don't we know that Yosef was in Egypt? Obviously we did. But the Torah comes to tell us that there was something compelling, something essential, something wonderful somehow in what would be this experience in Egypt that everybody wanted to be part of, that nobody wanted to miss. And that HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt was so important that had some of the Jewish people not been able to make it, he would have enabled Yosef to have more children to fill the gap so that on somehow 12 different tribes to be, 12 different elements of the family of Yaakov, 12 different contributors to what would ultimately be the Jewish people, each somewhat different, would be in Egypt, experiencing this experience, and ultimately building the Jewish people. So, why do we connect it to Sefer Bereshit? And why the strange structure of the Pasuk? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to tell us something. He wants to tell us that don't look at this Egypt thing or any other galut, any other exodus out of the land at its simple surface value. Everybody wanted to be there, and it was essential to be there, and we're going to tell you why. The term ba'im in general, we should know. There are certain terms in the Chumash that wherever they are, they have a specific meaning. And the term ba, lavo, ba'im, whenever you see it in the Chumash or the Navi, know that it doesn't simply mean to come, to physically get to a place. It means to do something that's the beginning of an important step up. So in the first verse of Shemot, when we have the term ba'im, and we have it twice, even though the Jews will very soon become slaves, the Torah is coming to tell us that the term ba'im means that there will be a great elevation coming from this. And it's written twice in the Pasuk to emphasize the point. And then we get a little tip-off. The tip-off is that in the very beginning, when the Jewish people get there, we have a description of their experiences. What do you guys remember? And unmute and answer, whoever's got it. What is the beginning experience of the Jewish people in Egypt? Who remembers? What happened to them? Yeah, sorry.
They multiply.
Super. How did the multiplication happen? How did it work? How did it work? What do you say?
They had like, I think I remember from elementary school, like 6 kids at once.
Beautiful. So את פרו וישוצו וירבו ויעצמו במאוד מאוד ותמלא הארץ אותם. Right? Great. So what does it say? We had a lot of births, right? People would give birth very often. Each birth would be multiple children. Vayirbu, ribuy of chokhmah. We became smart. We became more learned. V'yatzmu, We had otzem, we had koach, we had power that we hadn't had before. Bim'od me'od, way beyond the laws of nature and way beyond what the typical process would allow. So wow, now things are starting to shape up. First pasuk it said, super, everybody wants to be there. Not really clear to us because we know how Egypt turned out. It wasn't a very good place for the Jewish people. Drop down number 1. What happened when they were there? Grand slam success on every level. Population, learning, knowledge, power, financial power, but to maleh aretz otam. It seemed as if the whole country was filled by them. Similar, you might say, to if you ask just an average person today in America or in Europe, how many Jews are there in America? They'll tell you 30 million. What do you mean? There's 6 million. How many Jews are there in Europe? They'll tell you 50 million. Talking about 2 million, 3 million. The level of influence, the disproportionate representation in terms of intellectual areas, spiritual areas, really no different than it is today, was obvious in Egypt as well. Now, okay, great. So we understand that seemingly it was a good thing going down, and certainly in the first stages, it was great. And we understand that the term ba is meant to communicate to us that this is only about good. Okay. In order to begin to understand this, to get somewhat of a perspective on this, I want to move a little bit to the side and focus on something that's also somewhat curious, needs our understanding, and will enlighten us on the whole story and our whole story. I want to discuss for a few minutes the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, the story of Moshe is very, very curious. Nobody really understands why Moshe's parents aren't mentioned when he's first born. We don't know who they are. We know that he came from the tribe of Levi, but we don't know anything else. There's virtually no mention at all of Moshe's father at any point. Virtually no mention of him. Where was he? We understand that he was brought up in the house of Paro. What was he? What did he think of himself? How did he carry himself? The Torah seems to give us the sense that he really looked at himself very much like an Egyptian. And in fact, way down into his life to a point when he runs away from Egypt and ultimately meets his wife in the home of his father-in-law and names his first child. He names him Gershom, and he says, Ger Hayiti Be'eretz Nochriya, meaning he's in Midian, and he's a stranger, he's a sojourner from his home. What was his home? Egypt. So it seems that Moshe Rabbeinu, for the better part of his life, had no real sense of who he was. Wasn't clear. Thought he was an Egyptian. Names his first child after he married Sipporah. He's pretty far along. And he bemoans the fact that he's away from his homeland, from Egypt. In fact, when he goes and he meets her, how do they describe him? Ish Mitzri. He was dressed and he carried himself like an Egyptian. It's only later, after the experience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the Sneh, at the burning bush, that he calls his second son Eliezer, which means Elokei Avi Be'ozri, that the God of my father is my helper, is my partner. So what do we see? We see in the life of Moshe Rabbeinu that he starts out in a place foreign and distant from his own people. And he begins to take a journey back. And in fact, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to him in last week's parasha and tells him, come on, time to move, time to help your own people, we all know what he says, not interested, not qualified, don't want to do it. And then we have this very curious passage where he's on his way to the inn with his newborn son, and this giant serpent attempts to kill him. And our rabbis call these handful of psukim, of verses, the most mysterious in the Torah. Our rabbis say that what happened here, that Rashbam brings, that what happened was that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't really want to go and was ambivalent about helping the Jewish people, still didn't know who he was. And whenever someone who's sent on a major mission to save his people hesitates, HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes very angry, similar to what happened with Yonah, who gets consumed by the whale. So in parallel to us figuring out what this whole Egypt thing is, i.e. then what our experiences are in America, we also need to understand what our leader experienced. And what we see from the verses is that he wasn't so clear about who he was. In fact, tell me, you guys, tell me, what does he ask God when God tells him, go speak to the Jewish people? And he tells, and he mentions to God, well, they're going to ask me something about you. What is it? Marielle, what is it? Huh?
What should I call you? What should I say your name is?
Beautiful. What should I say your name is, Serene? What should I say your name is? Now, what does God answer him?
Ehyeh, I think.
Beautiful. He answers him, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Then he says it again, Ehyeh. What does Ehyeh mean?
I will be.
Beautiful. Is that his name?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, our rabbis say, interestingly, they struggle with that. They say, what do you mean? What does Ehyeh mean? We never saw Ehyeh as one of God's names. We have a list of all those names that God manifests himself to us, through which we can understand somewhat, the very limited amount of what he is. Ehyeh is actually not one of them, interestingly. So what do our rabbis say? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, and he repeats it again and again, he's talking to him. He's saying, I'm the God who was always here, who started it all, and who will always be here. You, Moshe, you have to get that. You have to come along. Now, he finishes in the last pasuk, and he says, Elokei Abraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov shelachani. He says, now go back to the Jewish people and tell them the God of their great-grandfather, grandfather, and great-great-grandfather, and so on, Elokei Abraham, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's who sent me. That's the name, that's the connotation through which we would recognize God. We would never recognize him through Ehyeh. So our rabbis say, Moshe wasn't there. Moshe was very much an Egyptian, very distant from his people. And when he's struggling and he's asking and God is answering, God is attempting to get him on board, to make his journey clear, to strengthen him in understanding what he needed to be. So we take a step back. Egypt, not described as all that bad. In fact, when we first get there, we're doing great. Maybe there's an issue here of development and identification, not so clear. Maybe there is. So what might be the tip-off to that? The story of Moshe that's told to us, which is said at length and is surprising, that gives us the sense that he was certainly ambivalent about helping the Jewish people. And more, he didn't want to do it. And it might be that he simply didn't understand who he was. And it seems as if he didn't, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to reprimand him, had to give him these extraordinary above nature signs. And then he had to tell him, I'm the only one who ever was and whoever will be. There ain't nobody else. And in fact, the God that the Hebrews will recommend, well, that's Elokei Avraham. That's the God of their fathers. They certainly know who that is. Okay, let's take a pause. We're trying to understand what the Galut thing, what the Exodus, what the diaspora thing is about. It's important to understand it because it impacts everything we do. It impacts everything we think. Certainly at a time like this, when we're seeing so many of the world's confidence pillars shaken, so many things shaken, we need to get a better perspective on what's happening. And if we understand Egypt, we understand more. Now, you guys tell me, where are we first told that this thing called Egypt will take place for the Jewish people? Where is it first mentioned?
When Abraham has to go down to Egypt,
When Abraham
goes down to Egypt.
not when he goes down, but what? When is it first mentioned? It's mentioned at a pivotal point in Abraham Avinu's life, 30 some odd chapters before where we are now. When is this notion of Egypt mentioned?
Was it when he was told not to go down to Egypt?
No, what, but when is it? No, not that part, not good. We're not
The
talking
Brit
about,
Ben Habetarim.
beautiful, Brit Ben Abetarim. What is that? What is that? What was Brit Ben Abetarim? When did it happen? Very good, great. When did it happen? So Abraham wages this war. We remember there was a war of 4 kings against 5 kings. The 4 kings, right, Mariella, you remember? The 4 kings were actually stronger. What, honey?
It's the promise between Hashem and Abraham.
That's right. Great one. So Abraham Avinu, the 4 kings beat the 5. They take Lot as a prisoner. Everybody's familiar with the story. Abraham Avinu goes to war with them and beats them. And at that point, Lo Alenu still doesn't have a child and feels that maybe he used up all his credits, all the sachar, all the benefit, all the reward from everything he had done and how he had lived his life. Maybe he spent it all on this victory. And he turns to Kadosh Baruch Hu and he says, now what? What am I doing? Where am I going? And by the way, I don't even have a child. What's going on? So what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell him? What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell him?
He's going to have many children.
He tells him he's going to have many children, right? Beyond the point where he can count them. What else does he tell him? What else does he say?
That
Marielle, don't show up all the adults, honey. Just go easy on us. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Serene?
Didn't he say strangers and going to be strangers in a strange land?
Absolutely. He says strangers in a strange land. He said that your children will go down to this land, and for 400 years, they will suffer in this land. For 400 years, they will suffer in this land. Now, then he tells him, they're going to go down to another foreign country. They're going to be slaves. They're going to suffer, la alenu. They're going to be down there for 400 years. And then after a certain period of time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to deal with that, the nation that enslaved them. Vayetzu birchush gadol. And they will leave with great wealth. Now, Abraham Avinu, lo alenu, has no children. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been telling him for decades, everything's going to be great. You're going to be the father of multitudes. Still has nothing. Just waged a war. He's not a fighter. Put everything at risk. Saves his nephew. Kadosh Baruch Hu comes back and tells him, don't worry, you haven't used up all your credit. You still have a lot more. You're a great man, and I'm still going to build you. And you know how it's going to happen? I'm going to take your children down to a hostile place, and I'm going to torment them. And Kadosh Baruch Hu and Abraham Avinu says, great, I'm in. Now, what's going on here? What is going on here? What do you say? I mean, the strangest thing that you would imagine God to tell him, right? Oh, you want reassurance that everything's going to be good? Let me reassure you. Here's what's going to happen. What do you think? What's going on here? What do you think?
This is,
Anybody? Bobby?
yeah, hi. Maybe this is when they become a nation, like they have to have something in common. They have to have gone through similar experiences and they have to unite like as one people.
Great. So there's something very positive and important that has to happen here, right? There's something very positive and important. The Midrash says, based on your point, that the Shi'bud Mitzrayim, and this is held pretty much across the board, not only on a level of Midrash, that the Shi'bud Mitzrayim, to your point, Bobby, the enslavement in Egypt is what enabled us to receive the Torah. And the galut that followed later is what enables Mashiach to ultimately be. So 1 second. I have to suffer in order to celebrate? Why should that be? What might that be telling me? Why would it have to be? It's challenging and it's concerning. If we're God's chosen people, and the way to worship him, the way to service him, the way to be closest to him is through Torah, through the Beit HaMikdash, through Mashiach ultimately, what do I need all this for? What do we need the challenging? What do we need the difficult times? Why the slavery? So we're going to build on Bobby's point. We're going to build on it in a couple of steps. In order to build on it, I want to take a few minutes and explain what the term rechush means. Rechush means wealth or ownership. What would you guys say it means? Rechush. Vayetzu b'rechush gadol. And they will leave with great ownership. What's so curious about that? And what does it mean? Let me give you a little background in terms of how our rabbis explain the term rechush as it's used in the Torah. First of all, rechush or wealth or ownership is something that's concrete and quantifiable. Good. It's something that's in the possession of the person who has it. In other words, not a piece of paper about a piece of ownership that's someplace else. It's a piece of jewelry, it's a piece of silver, it's a piece of land in that owner's possession. Point number 3 is that it's completely under that owner's control. So it's concrete and quantifiable, it's in the owner's possession, and it's totally in his control. And that's the way the Jewish people are going to leave Egypt. Now you tell me what's almost impossible to fathom in that respect.
We ran out in the middle of the night.
They ran out in the middle of the night and
They didn't have anything.
they didn't have anything. And why didn't they have anything? Because they were slaves. The slave is the epitome of this. The slave has nothing. The slave can't even make a decision about how to spend his time. His time is not even his own. The most basic of human expressions of ownership is not his. Time isn't even his. So you're talking about the Jewish people who are going to be sent to the land of Egypt, who are going to be enslaved. And then Yetzu b'rechush gadol, it's almost impossible to put together. How can it possibly happen?
Is
And,
it,
yeah, Bobby, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're getting, maybe are you alluding to the fact that it's something like in the brain? Like you can't, like you have, like it's in your head?
Well, what do you think?
I'm
Talk to
not-
me. What do you think? What do you think? You tell me. It says in the beginning of the pasuk,
mean-
the middle of the pasuk, right? We're going to be enslaved and worse. And then God will deal with our enemy, that nation that enslaved us, and then we leave very wealthy and not wealthy where the bank owns most of it, or it's somewhere I can't access it, or like Naomi and Ruth, where it was tied up and they were poor halachically. None of that. It's in your hands. It's concrete. It's yours. How is it possible? What do you say?
So it's not a mental state.
I don't
It's
know.
not
Maybe
as-
maybe it is. Maybe it is and it is. Maybe it's that and that. But before you get to what it is, whether it's physical or mental or spiritual, deal with what's going on here? What's going on here? What is HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying? How does it make any sense? We start out superstars in Egypt. We have a disproportionate influence, disproportionate wealth, disproportionate success, all the good stuff. They're threatened. They shut the doors. They slam things down very hard on us. And then at the end of this process of owning nothing, of having no power, of having no say, we leave each individual greatly enriched.
I think it's all about their freedom. It's all about their freedom. Like they realize that they,
It's a test in bitachon.
But more than that, good, more, keep going, keep going. Why leave me in Israel? Leave me there. The Midrash says if Yaakov and his children decided to take their food and go back, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have built the Jewish nation from Yosef in Egypt. Why? Hang out, take your food, right? Yosef is there. He's going to protect and go back home. Abe, what do you say? Go back home. Right? What do you think? They stayed and they thrived. So I believe that it's along these lines. We rejected, as humankind in general, and let's say the Jewish people in particular, although there weren't Jewish people at that point, we rejected the whole Gan Eden thing. We rejected it. We said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you want us to further creation? You want us to build? We don't want the idyllic stuff. We want to be challenged. We want to have to fight. We want to have to scrap. We want to be knocked down. We want to be able to make hard choices. We want to be able to be heroic. We don't want Gan Eden. You told us not to eat, not to act in a certain way. We went ahead and did it. Thrown out. Wait a minute. Why? Because we didn't want it any other way. Guess what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want it any other way either. What does that mean? What does it mean that there has to be in Egypt to be a Torah? What does it mean? Come on, what does it mean? Yeah, Sari.
Does it mean we have to earn the Torah?
What does it mean, earn? You're more. Go further. What does it
We
mean?
have to experience suffering to appreciate good things.
Okay, but more, but you know
What
what?
about-
Yes.
what about
Yeah.
empathy, having empathy for other people?
What about having empathy for others? I want to do this. I want to take suffering, although it's certainly part of this thing. I want to take suffering, put it on the side. I want to put it on the side. I want you to deal with things outside of that, even though it's very much part of it, right? But I don't want to deal with that. I want to deal with other things. What's empathy? Talk to me about empathy. What's empathy? What does it mean?
When you've been there. When you've been there.
It means when I've been there, but even maybe when I'm not there, right? Even when I'm not there. Now, if I'm living in a foreign country And I have to learn to empathize about anyone and everyone, but I have to learn to do that in a very complicated way. I have to live in Egypt, empathize with the Egyptian who's not my people, who's in pain, as Yosef Sadiq did, while I remain exclusively committed to my people. How hard is that? Again, if it could have all happened in Israel, keep them there, feed them, send them home. Yosef, every month, send them camels and wagons to keep everybody well fed. Ve'ele shemot habaim mitzrayma. These are the names. We're calling out these people. We've already named them a couple of times in Sefer Bereshit. Now we want to name them again because we want you to know what's going on here. What's going on here is the most essential element of the development of the Jewish people. And is it suffering a part of it? God forbid? Yes. But that's a part of everything. That could have been a part of their lives in Eretz Israel also. But what the Torah is shouting here is something more complicated than that. The Torah is shouting that the galut, living in the diaspora, forces the most complex of things. And it goes back in a sense to what we talked about with the translation of Tamai HaMelech, when he translated the Torah into Greek, and what that meant for the Jewish people, and how it was looked on so negatively. Why? Because what does the diaspora do for us? It forces us to keep choosing.
To keep what?
To keep choosing.
Choosing.
The choices are never black and white. They're always gray. Because I want to love my own people the most. I want to affiliate with my own people intensely. But I can't affiliate with them exclusively. I want to be kind to my own people primarily, but I don't want to be other than kind to other people. I have certain halachot that relate to my people uniquely, and I have to learn those halachot and do them. But I don't want to be disrespectful to other people. Now, take a person and put her, let's say, in a controlled environment where the only things that they're looking at are all the good things that family wants them to be. Beautiful. The child will grow up beautiful. And that's a good thing. But now, if I want to put the same child in an environment where I don't have complete control, in an environment where there's going to be other influences, and I'm going to tell the child, listen, you live here by design. There can't be Mashiach without America. There can't. There can't be Mashiach without Russia, without wherever the Jews have been. There can't be. It won't be. You know why? Because you're not refined enough. The kli, the vessel, it's not challenged enough. It doesn't have to make those subtle distinctions. It doesn't have to be challenged to remain incredibly true to the Jewish people and incredibly respectful to everybody else. And where do most people end up? They end up in one extreme or the other. Insulated completely from the world, incredibly true to the Jewish people, Ashrehem, they did fantastic with that, or assimilated and disconnected from their people. Either of those is not what Borei Olam wanted. Borei Olam says, you know what? There's a lot of good in Americans. Americans are the finest people who ever lived on the planet. A lot of good in Americans. There's a lot of good in people from every country. So you have to affiliate with them, but not assimilate with them. You have to teach them and be taught by them, but stay separate from them. You have to know who you are in the context of everybody else. If you take it seriously, there's nothing harder and there's nothing greater. If we really go back to what we said last week, where tikkun olam means me, making me the best I should be, and building my family and my community to the best we could be, and thereby enriching the world, that's a very tough thing to do. It means I'm on this plan to continue to grow individually, to enable my children and grandchildren to continue to grow, to help my community continue to grow. And at the same time, I have an eye, so to speak, looking around me and saying, I have what to learn from the outside world, but I'm fiercely Jewish. Yes, but I have what to learn, and there's good, and let's take it in. And no less important, if not more important, I have what to give. And how do I give it? By how I live and how I act. So there is a journey here. There's an absolute journey. There's a process. Moshe Rabbeinu had to experience it. He felt himself Egyptian. He didn't even know who he was. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to fight with him and say, wait a second. You love Egypt. You have Hakarat HaTov. You have respect and good wishes for Egypt, who brought you up, and the throne of Egypt who brought you up. Good. Maintain that. But one second. Your son Eliezer, that's who you are. You can't dilly-dally going back and forth to the hotel when you're on your way to Egypt to save your people. You got to get there. You got to know who you are. Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. I'm always going to be here. The God of the Jews is always going to be here. And I demand that you continue to grow Jewishly and you continue to interact with the world around you. And even when they're going to cause you to suffer, even though they're going to cause you to suffer, I'm going to take retribution on them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, nobody is going to cause pain to the Jewish people and just get off. But your role is to be fiercely Jewish, fiercely knowledgeable about who you are, growing in that knowledge all the time, and comfortable and involved and happy to enrich the people around us. And this is what I believe the story of Egypt represents. This is what I believe America represents, has to represent. There's no way that there will be Mashiach without America. There's no way there'll be Mashiach without Britain and Germany and everything else. There's no way. There's no way. How do we bring it along? By creating a bubble around ourselves, because we need to do that, because we are part of this exclusive club, and by interacting at the same time and enriching at the same time and standing as a role model at the same time. I can't give up on either. And that's what we want. We want to be able to be heroic. We want to be able to make choices. We want to be able to be out there. We want to be role models. You know, there's we'll just wrap up with this and open for some thoughts and questions. You know, the greatest thing someone can do is to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim, to sanctify God's name. And our rabbis go out at length to describe what is the sanctification of God's name, or the opposite. And the question is, how do you do it? You know, how do you do it? And as a person who wears a kippah, I'm very, very sensitive to it. And I know that there are times when I didn't do it properly, because you got to call me out. There's no way not to call me out, right? I can't really hide it. Now, I chose to do that. I don't know, for better or otherwise. But that means that you're all the time, you're on this thing of, how does this look? Now, I can't compromise halacha for how does this look, right? But I can be sensitive and think about it. So, the message tonight is that that it's going to happen when we're in the Galut, when we're outside the land of Israel. It's going to be very challenging by design. It's going to be fantastic and it's going to be painful. And that's the only way we and Akadosh Baruch Hu wanted it to be. Because it's the only way. We can't do it in the land of Israel for the whole time by ourselves. As idyllic as that may sound, it wouldn't have worked. The galut, the diaspora, is not a punishment. It's part of the process. And if we embrace it and we understand that we got to keep building our bubble on the one hand and keep reflecting beyond it on the other hand, then we've taken it very seriously. And then we can build something very, very important, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to build. Good. Thoughts?
Ricky?
Yep.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is that we have to be a light unto the nations.
Yep. Yes, and more, Aunt Sandy. What would you add to that?
Well, we've got to get that light inside us so we can reflect it out.
Exactly. So we have to be very aware of that. We have to be very aware of that. And it comes from exactly as you said, the light inside of us pushes the light out. As long as I'm aware of both, I got to be growing. I have to have my rechush, right? As Bobby said, what is the rechush? Is it spiritual? Is it physical? It could be physical, yeah, the way it's explained could be, but it's certainly spiritual. It's certainly spiritual. The tone, the nuance, the eye contact, the facial expression, the body language, it's all essential. It's all great. We know we're on target with it. And by the way, I want to say, without trying to exaggerate anything, I think it's heroic when a Jewish person is fiercely committed to halakha and community and Jewish heritage and their customs and traditions, and at the same time has an eye to the world around them and understands that they can and should learn from them and must impact them, that's heroics. That's a great person. And that's what we want. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu fashioned into this process.
I think you've accomplished that.
Inshallah, we're all accomplishing it, God willing.
Thank you, Ricky. Hazako Baruch. Beautiful.
Thank you, Chacham. Thank you for joining us. Thank you
My
all.
pleasure.
Marielle, great to have you, honey.
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you all. Have a great night. Thank you,
Thank you
Bob.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Lorraine.
Hi, gorgeous.
Thank you.